Hello, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone, and wherever you are, and welcome to today's episode of Journalists Lens, where we will deep dive into the world of storytelling, exploring the challenges, nuances, and the ethics of reporting on the most pressing issue of our time. Today, we are absolutely thrilled and privileged to joined by Philippe de Avile. I hope I'm pronouncing your name right.
Close enough. It's Deviles or Daviles would be closer, but
Daviles.
yeah.
Okay, so Mr. Philip Daviles is joining us from Lisbon, Portugal, and he is an accomplished journalist who specializes in reporting on religious affairs, which is very sensitive topics these days. His work takes him to the intersections of faith, culture, and the global events, often delving into complex and sensitive topics. Thank you so much, Philip, for joining us for the first time on SARIM's platform. Since this is the first time we are interacting with each other, my name is Furqan, and I have the absolute honor of hosting this episode today. SARIM is a non-profit organization dedicated to amplifying the voices of marginalized communities and victims of systematic violence through interviews, webinars, featuring esteemed scholars, activists, journalists, think tanks, policymakers across the world. We are not just limited in South Asia, but we try to gauge the attention of international speakers on various sensitive topics like these. So without wasting our time, we will be discussing the art of reporting because we have the artist who will be teaching us the traits and nuances of reports on religion specifically, and more or less on other sensitive issues as well. Thank you so much, Philip. I would start with the first question. What was the motivation behind for choosing this niche of religious reporting of religious affairs, and what another focus of your journalism as well? So I want you to walk us through your journey of journalistic point of view, and what basically motivated you to choose that niche. Thank you so much. Over to you.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for having me. It's an honor and a privilege as well. Well, I've always been fascinated by the religious phenomena. This is something that is out in the open. It's no secret. I am a person also I have a personal faith. I'm a religious person, and faith plays a very important part in my life. But that doesn't necessarily then translate into reporting on religion, because there are two different things. And I report on many religions besides my own. So that the two things are connected in that I find religion fascinating, but they don't necessarily follow one from the other. And to give you another example, I'm a huge football fan. I love football and I love the football culture, but I would hate to be a football journalist because it's just not something that attracts me. So the two don't necessarily follow. I studied international relations at university, and I'd wanted to be a journalist since quite young. I remember the first thing that really sort of piqued my interest was in the 90s, the first Gulf War, I was 10 in 1990, so 11 or 12 when that war began. And it was the first war that really sort of came into our living rooms. We were able to watch it live, and I found all that fascinating. And I thought, this is what I want. I want to be a war reporter. And of course, things didn't work out that way. But then when I went to study international relations, I was surprised at how little attention was paid to religion in the study of international relations, and that was reflected more widely. It's such an important phenomena worldwide, and yet so few people were taking it seriously in the effects that it has on international relations in terms of conflict and so on, in terms of peace building as well, because they're both sides of that story, and just generally as a social engine, as something that motivates people to do different things. They can be good or they can be bad, but religion is an important factor. And so I started during my university degree to try and focus on some religious aspects when I had to do assignments and so on. I got my first job working in a magazine about books, so not related to religion. And then I had the opportunity to go and work at a mainstream media group in Portugal, it's the leading radio group in Portugal with an important online presence as well, but it is fully owned by the Catholic Church. But it's not exclusively religious programming or information and so on. And that gave me the opportunity to, when I arrived, I said, guys, this is what I really like. I like to work on religion stories. And many of the people in the newsroom were like, oh, excellent. That means we don't have to do it because they didn't like it. And so I had the space, and I was able to carve out a space and make a bit of a name for myself there. I left that media group about 3 years ago, and since then I've been a freelancer. focusing mostly on this issue, working with some big international, one big international foundation in particular, Aid to the Church in Need, which is a Catholic organization, so they're much more with a Catholic focus, but then occasionally writing stories also for other publications as well, focusing on the issue of religion. So that's what led me to where I am at the moment.
Thank you so much for comprehensively providing the insights of what pushed you initially. So, in terms of international relations, they're both intersectionally connected in terms of what is happening around the world, especially in the current uh, era of what we are facing today. So, you talked about your interest and how it got developed. So, I will be switching my next question to the religion, basically, that can be polarizing subject. Right. And what are some of the biggest challenges you face when reporting on religious issues, especially in countries with diverse or conflict faith communities?
Mm-hmm. Right. So I think one of the big challenges is understanding exactly what role religion plays in certain situations. So, from my perspective, because I very much, I will always look for the religion angle in a story. There is the risk that I will look at a conflict and say, this is a religious conflict because the different sides are, one is Muslim, the other is Christian, or one is Orthodox and the other is Catholic. And maybe religion is a factor, but maybe it's only a small factor. And this happens quite often. So take, for example, the current war in Ukraine, between Ukraine and Russia. These are two mostly Orthodox countries. One of them has an influential Catholic component as well. And before the war began, there was a heightening of religious tension because one of the Orthodox churches wanted to be independent from the other, and the other considered that territory belonged to it. And so this was an issue that compounded what was essentially a social and political issue of whether or not Ukraine should be within the sphere of influence of Moscow or not. So it's not a religious conflict, definitely, but religion played a role. On the other hand, you can have the other extreme of people who think that religion is something absolutely marginal, it plays no role in anything, and so they can look at a conflict which is overtly religious and not see the religious dimension, or try and sweep it away. So when we had, for example, the rise of Islamic extremism across the Middle East, there were lots of people saying, "Oh, we know, but it's not really about religion. It's about economic difficulties. These people only turn to terrorism because they don't have job perspectives, and they don't manage to have an education." And so, yeah, that might play a role, but it doesn't explain everything. Okay, because there are other places in the world where people also don't have perspectives, and yet they don't have that someone playing the religion card to manipulate them to do what was being done there. So you have to be able to strike the balance and see exactly how important religion is, not ignore it, but also not overemphasize it if it isn't to be overemphasized. And a personal challenge is that I may be writing a story about something and it may be fascinating, but I probably, because I live in a country where there is peace and there's basically no religious conflict or tension at all. In Portugal, where Portugal is a majority Catholic country, Christian and majority Catholic, we have a small Muslim community which is perfectly adapted to the country and to our culture. The leader of the Muslim community has often said that Portugal is a paradise for the Islamic community because they are very well established here. So we have no tension whatsoever. In many ways, it's an example of interreligious harmony, which is a great thing. But if I'm writing about a country where there is religious tension, I have to remember that I won't have to live with the consequences of what I'm writing because I'm not there. So if I write something that someone in that country, if say I'm writing about persecuted Christians, or say I'm maybe not necessarily persecuted, but a Christian minority in the Holy Land, for example. Recently, I visited the Holy Land, and we were visiting many of the Christian communities there. And say someone tells me sort of off the record, says, "Oh, and this is something I'm inventing." So just to give an example, "Oh, our Muslim neighbors are putting a lot of pressure on us to convert, or they're discriminating us." And I get home and I write this in a story, and it's published. Then I won't have to live with the consequences of maybe an extremist Muslim in that country saying, "Wait a second, what are the Christians saying? Ah, look at them. Look now they're saying this. They think we're persecuting them. Now we really will," or something like that. So I have to be careful because, as you and I both know, religion can be a very, very powerful driver. When people feel that their religion is legitimating them to do something, giving them the legitimacy to do something, empowering them to do something, then it's coming directly from God. and so nothing will stop them, and they will feel that they are sinning if they don't carry it out, even if they're deeply mistaken. And so it can be a very dangerous field to cover. As journalists, for example, many journalists don't like showing their stories to the people they're covering before publishing, or if we get an interview, we don't want the person who we've interviewed to then go through the answers and make corrections, or give us, or tell us how we should or shouldn't frame certain issues. But I have, and generally I agree with that. On the other hand, I have written about issues that are so sensitive that I know it would be dangerous not to show it first to the person, saying, look, are you sure that everything that you told me can be published? This will not place you in danger. So that's also something that we need to be careful with. And then basically it's important to use common sense, and to think, if I publish, is it necessary to publish this? Or will the consequences outweigh the benefits of publishing it? And we had examples in Europe over the past decade. Fortunately, I think we haven't had one recently, but with the publishing of the cartoons depicting Muhammad, the Prophet of Islam, and the consequences that had. And then there was a debate over free speech versus respecting religious sensitivity. I think a lot of it comes down to common sense. I once interviewed someone from the Baha'i faith, and then I published the full transcript of the interview on my blog, which is nowadays a website. And I put a photograph of the Baha'u'llah, who's the founder of the Baha'i faith. And he phoned me and said, "Oh, Filipe, I'm sorry, we in the Baha'i faith, we don't like having depictions of Baha'u'llah." And I said, "Sure, no problem." I took it down. I'm not there. I have no intention of offending anyone. There's no real benefit in having the image there. So a lot of it comes down to common sense as well. Unfortunately, common sense is often lacking in the world, and there's a big price to pay for that many times.
Thank you so much. During your talk, you talked about the striking balance, managing the balance. You did cover my next question, but I do have a follow-up question on that. Being a journalist, you must have known about the usage of different sort of words. Let's say sensitization. I happen to have worked on a project that was related to gender equality reporting, right? So we have to have a balance of this. So have you came across with any instance or any, let's say a person came to you, coach you that you should not have used this word. Let's say a priest, right? A priest can be priest, so he cannot be a Christian priest, cannot become a Christian priest or Muslim priest or Hindu priest for that matter. So do you also take care of the selection of words to not to harm others in terms of their sensitivity or their emotional attachment to their religion?
Definitely, it's very important to use the right terms. And it's interesting because that touches on another topic. People are very, as you said, people are very, very sensitive about their religion, and in that sense, interestingly, there's religion and sports have a lot in common, right? I will, if I'm reading an article about history or about politics, and someone gets something wrong about the political party that I prefer at that time, I won't take offense. I realize, journalists make mistakes. Maybe I'll call attention to it. Maybe I'll laugh about it. It's not the end of the world. But if someone writes, if I see a blatant mistake or something that I see as unbalanced about my football team, I'll be furious. And the same thing with religion. People take it personally when it shouldn't be taken personally because journalists make mistakes. Now that plays into a different issue, which is the fact that many times newspapers or televisions, media corporations send journalists to cover sensitive topics like religion when they are not prepared to do so. Okay? Because they don't take it seriously. They think it's just people talking to their imaginary friends and so on, as we see critics saying sometimes. There's often a great bias against religion on the part of media, and so they'll make silly mistakes. It's not necessarily intentional. It may stem from ignorance, but it's not necessarily malevolent, and it probably is not malevolent, and so it shouldn't be read as such. I've seen some absolutely ridiculous mistakes made concerning religion. I mean, I'll share one with you, which I found hilarious. But when John Paul II died, I think it was the BBC at the time, which is a very respected news organization, had a photo gallery, and they had a photograph of a nun kneeling beside, or a group of nuns, in fact, in their convent, and they were praying because the Pope had died. And the caption underneath said, "A group of karma," as in karma, and then light, as in light, a group of Carmelite nuns praying for the dead Pope. And because this was a mistake, obviously, because there is an order of nuns in Catholicism called Carmelite, which comes from Mount Carmel. So they were Carmelite, Carmelite. And it would make absolutely no sense from a Christian perspective to have nuns that are karma light nuns, as in karma, which is an Eastern Buddhist or perhaps Hindu concept. So it would make absolutely no sense. It's absolute ignorance. It was written by someone who has no clue what they're talking about. So why is this person covering that issue? And I often think if I were to go and cover certain issues, if I were to write about economy, which is something I know nothing about, with the same ignorance that some people write about religion, I would be fired from wherever I was working. Or if I did that about politics or about sports. But people think that since it's religion, it doesn't really matter. It's all ignorant people who believe in these things anyway. So it doesn't. Who cares? And that's a huge mistake, because people will react badly to those mistakes. And even if it doesn't have more serious consequences, it's very detrimental to the reputation of the media organization that is doing it.
Indeed, and then the question or the point that you raised regarding the picture of those nuns, I would also like sort of deviate from the topic. So there's an element of disinformation, misinformation, and fake news comes into play, being on a digital spaces or even on conventional media. So how do you see and how do you avoid issues like these obviously you must be, double checking whatever you're posting, right? Because we are living in a digital world where people tend to attract as many audience as they can. So the usage of words like SEO, SEO-friendly terminologies that often the algorithms of social media design in a way that attracts. I was in a debate yesterday that talked about that paid content is a lucrative business for all those social media owners. So how do you perceive this notion of responsibility and irresponsibility from those who commit most of the time to gain as many audience as they possible? Because you're a freelance journalist, you don't necessarily have to have that newsroom pressure, around you. So can you please respond to that?
Yeah, I think we have to remember that as journalists, our first mission is in service to the truth. And as journalists and as human beings, I think we have that responsibility. I have often used my personal website to debunk things that are going around social media, and because even if only amongst family and friends, because they know that I've specialized in this area, sometimes I will get sent messages, for example, saying, "Filipe, I just got this message. It says that." This is a true one, okay? This is a true message. It's fake, but this actually happened. And being from your part of the world, I think you'll understand how absurd this seems. It says that a group of fundamentalist Buddhists in India has vowed to burn down 200 churches and kill all the priests inside. And this has been circulating for years and years and years. And it's even signed by a supposed priest from India. And of course the priest doesn't exist. None of this is true. And so the first few times I was like, guys, this doesn't make any sense. There are no fundamentalist Buddhists in India. There are not very many Buddhists in India to start with. They would certainly not be burning down churches. At one point, I put up, I actually wrote an article on my blog, on our website, saying fake news about radical Buddhists in India. But there's so many others that keep coming around. There was another one a few years ago about how when ISIS was expanding in Iraq, and of course they were expanding in an area where there are many Christians around Mosul, and many Christians had to flee. And so there were terrible things that were done to Christians there. But there was one big town which is fully Christian called Karakosh. And Karakosh, the people were warned that ISIS was arriving, and the whole city managed to escape. Everyone managed to escape. But yet, a few weeks later, there were still messages going around saying, "Oh my goodness, all the Christians in Karakosh are going to be murdered tomorrow." And I was like, there are no Christians left in Karakosh. They've all left. They're safe. And it got to the point where one of my editors at the media group I was working at before had gone to mass at lunchtime in Lisbon, and she came back and said, "Filipe, the priest at mass was very angry, saying no one in Portugal is paying attention. Why don't we see this on the news? The story of persecution of Christians in Iraq." And I said, "But we cover that all the time, persecution of Christians in Iraq." She said, "Oh yes, but there's a city in particular, and it's about to be invaded." And I said, "Oh, that's not true. It's fake." And so we have. I often think, who sits down and writes these fake stories and gets them going? I have no idea what's in it for them. And yes, it may be lucrative for the media platforms, but I fail to really understand. Sometimes maybe they're well-intentioned. It's occasionally one will go around saying when Pope Benedict XVI was still alive, there was a fake one that went around several times saying, "Oh, the Pope is close to death. He's like a candle flickering in the wind. We should pray." And then we'd write back and say, and it was always signed by his personal secretary, and we'd write back and say, "Look, this isn't true. this is not a true message. And people would go, oh, okay, but there's no harm in praying anyway. No, there's no harm in praying, but there's harm in circulating fake messages, because then people will stop believing the things that you send. So yeah, it's definitely a very, very complicated issue. And social media has made it easier to spread disinformation. It's made it easier to spread shallow information, also, which can also be dangerous. On the other hand, there are positives. We are exposed quite often to phenomena that we would know nothing about. So we can see about uh, uh, special festivities in Pakistan, for example, or Hindu festivities in India that I would not normally be exposed to. I was when I read that you had a question related to this in the questions you sent me beforehand. I remember thinking I have a personal fascination for Ethiopian Christian traditions. But I've never had the opportunity to travel to Ethiopia, and I won't be doing so anytime soon. And through social media, I occasionally get to see beautiful images of the churches and the traditions and the festivities. So of course, there's a plus side to it. But always, it's so easy nowadays to double check things. You go online, you Google it, and you find out if it's a hoax or if it's true, or then ask people. But don't just take anything on face value, especially if it seems designed to promote conflict and discord between communities, because someone will gain from that, but it's not the people on the ground.
Yeah, you rightly indicated towards that. Who does that, right? So they're like trolls and bots, the barrages of trolls and bots available on social media that automatically operates. Like, I mean, we're living in the world of artificial intelligence these days. So this has a huge impact on facilitating or perhaps misusage of this technology in a way to propagate hate for a particular community. So we are again, there's another follow-up or the extended point of what we just covered. Do you think that social media plays a role in shaping public perceptions of religion today? You did cover that. Has it helped or hindered religious discourse? You did cover half of it. I mean, yeah.
Yeah. In terms of helping or hindering, I think as I was saying, one of the points I said, like it's social media only allows for shallow discourse. Okay, it doesn't allow you to go really deep into issues. It's been interesting to see how, for example, now speaking of a reality that I'm closer to, how the Catholic Church has been making such an effort to get on board with social media. Like the Pope has Twitter accounts in several different languages, and the Vatican newsroom has very often publishes videos and so on, short videos that are very, very social media friendly. On the other hand, if you go through the Pope's Twitter account, he has nice uplifting messages every once in a while, but there's nothing really of great substance there. So it can be interesting sort of I may be going through my Twitter feed and there'll be something from the Pope. Oh, there, and you think that's nice. It's a way of remembering. And maybe for someone who isn't as connected as I am to the religious sphere, maybe that will wake them up and make them thirsty for more. But you need more. You need more than that. It's not enough. So I think it's important for religious organizations to understand that they need to be on social media, because that's where a lot of people are nowadays, and a lot of people are on there and nowhere else. They're not going to churches or mosques or temples. They don't know any priests or imams who they can ask about issues. And so that's where they'll be looking for their answers. On the other hand, the negative aspect, look how important social media I spoke briefly about ISIS and the terrible things that ISIS did in Iraq and Syria, more specifically during over the past decade. And how important social media was for that organization in particular, and how well they used it to spread their message of hate, to recruit young people from all over the world, including Europe, including people who had previously had no connection to Islam. They were not children of immigrants. They were Western born, Western educated, and they packed their bags and headed to Iraq or Syria to participate in carnage, and most of them probably to end up dead. And a lot of that was driven by social media. So it can also be very dangerous. But it's there, as you were saying, it's there. Like international artificial intelligence is there. Are we going to ignore it? Are we going to pretend it's not there? There's no point. So we should educate ourselves and educate our children, if that's the case, those we have any influence over, how to use it sensibly. I think that's all that we can do.
Yeah. Do you think the possibility of having or intervention of having international monitoring app, perhaps to stop or at least to to monitor what's going on and then report right away. Then there is an issue of anonymity comes into play. You said that that the or whatever priests from any other religion has to be there or use social media, right? But there are also possibilities of they being monitored and they are being attacked, through hateful content, right? A lot of warnings circulated around their uh, get circulated around their messages and inboxes. So hate speech plus the element of anonymity plus the an element of misinformation and fake news. It's quite of a double-edged sword to live in this situation. So I'll be moving to another. You talked about how you cross-check or double-cross your news before posting. I'll be asking or focusing on the approach do you follow, or any journalist should follow, about religion that involve controversial or sensitive topics reportings, such as religious extremism. You have a vast amount of knowledge on that, and also interfaith conflict or abuse within religious institutions.
Mhm. Yeah. I think, as I said before, truth. Remember that we are in service to truth. I mean, as a Christian, it is foremost in my mind that Jesus said, the truth will set you free. And we have to believe that. And the truth can hurt. The truth can bring us dangerous consequences sometimes for many people. Fortunately, I don't live in a place where I have to be afraid of speaking the truth, but many people do, and it can take a lot of courage. But we have to. We cannot. As a journalist, I'm not writing stories in service of an ideology or of propaganda. I'm writing stories in service of truth. Even as a Christian and as a practicing Catholic, I must not be afraid to write stories that can be difficult for the church that I belong to. And I've had quite a lot of experience with that. Because I have covered very closely and in depth the scandal of sexual abuse within the Catholic Church, specifically in Portugal, and that sort of really blew up last year, or just over a year ago. But I've been covering it for over a decade. I ended up becoming more or less an expert. Not so much an expert. How should I put this? I have on my website what is probably the best collection, most thorough collection of data regarding sexual abuse. So the people involved by diocese, by the number of convictions that there have been, the number of cases there have been, the priests who were suspended and then sent back. I've got all of that available and publicly available, and so it made me a bit of a reference in that area. And I've had a lot of blowback from that. A lot of people asking me, sort of, why are you focusing so much on this if this is something that hurts the church? And I say, well, I'm focusing on it because this is a wound, and it needs to heal. And the best way to heal is to expose it to fresh air and to the sun and to the light. Otherwise, it will fester and it will get even worse. But having said that, so I think that's essential to realize that we are at the service of the truth, and even if the truth hurts those we love, in my case, the people at the service of the church, it is for a greater good. It is so that the church will be better, and I truly believe that. On the other hand, we have to be thorough, and we have to have the information, or at least go looking for all the information, so that we will understand what is being said and what is going on. And this is very difficult when speaking about religion, because religious organizations generally are terrible at media relations. Terrible. They speak a language and a vocabulary that cannot be broken down into sound bites. The people often have very poor media training. Speaking here again of my reality, but I imagine this probably applies very closely to Islam as well. Priests, bishops, imams are not used to being questioned. So they're used to giving sermons, to giving orders, to telling people what to do. They're not used to being pressed and interrogated and put in difficult situations. And so they don't always react well to that. They'll speak to journalists as if they were speaking to their faithful sitting in their churches, and you can't do that because that's not how journalism works. And so I'll give you one example that happened last year. A very, very good man who's a personal friend of my family, the former Patriarch of Lisbon, at the time that the abuse scandal was really hitting Portugal hard. He was asked by journalists. He was sort of surrounded by journalists after a celebration that he presided over, and they said, "So, what do you think should happen to priests who are accused of abuse?" And they said, "Do you think that these priests should be suspended?" Okay. Now, what the journalists meant clearly was removed from ministry while the investigation is carried out. The problem is that in canon law, which is church law, the term suspended has an exact meaning, and only the Vatican can suspend a priest. Okay, and once a priest is suspended, he is removed from ministry because he has been found guilty. Okay, but that's not what the journalists meant, because they didn't know, and so they just meant removed from office temporarily, so that they're not dealing with faithful whilst they're being investigated. But the patriarch answered using the term in the legal church legal sense, and so he said, no, 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 no. Of course, we can't suspend priests, because that's something that we can't do. It has to come from the Vatican. There has to be a legal due process and so on. So they were speaking of, to use the English term, they were speaking of apples and oranges. So what did the journalists do? The journalists all went running back to their newsrooms and said, "Oh, the Patriarch of Lisbon says the priest shouldn't be suspended if they've been accused of abuse." That's not what he said, but it's how it came across. So I'm not saying that it's not his fault, because he has to understand that he's not speaking to specialists in canon law. But the journalists also have an obligation to know what they're talking about and to be able to understand what a bishop is saying. And that was lacking on both sides. I wasn't there. I was sitting at home. I saw this on TV. I understood immediately what had happened. Immediately. And I tried on my website to say, guys, look, there's this big mistake going on. This bishop has said one thing, and the people and the journalists have understood another. So it's ignorance on both sides, ill preparation on both sides. The church has to address that, and religious organizations have to address that within. They should have a bigger focus on media training, but journalists should also have a better preparation to better understand religious language. So that's definitely one of the difficulties in dealing with this issue.
Yeah, there are a lot of stories coming up from your end. We are actually left with one question, but I do have a follow-up question on the media training part. And thank you so much for providing the very detailed response and shared some of the incidents as well. Did you come across to any media training that you get involved where the priest, imams, or whoever has a religious responsibility were trained by you or your other colleagues? Or you tell us about any journalists, I would say women journalists or female journalists, so I'm sorry I have to use this word, who are reporting on religious issues. Are there any incidents have you come across, or have you seen some female journalists working on religious issues?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, oh, definitely. In fact, just going back to the place where I worked before, the media group that, as I said, was owned by the church, the leading religious reporter, who is a veteran Vatican correspondent, so she goes on all the papal trips and has been doing so since the 80s, is a woman. She was very influential in my own formation, because I learned very much from her. We're working, and the editor of religion at the time that I was working there was a woman as well. And since I left, one of the reporters who I know is now still there and specializing on religion is also a woman reporter. So I'd say there are quite a few, if not a balance, perhaps even a majority of women covering religion in Portugal at least, and I know of many at an international level as well. I think that in the world of religion reporting is not, at least in the West, is not very much of an issue, and I think women are very well respected within the media world as religion reporters. In terms of media training, personally, I have never done any media training for clergy, but I am very good friends with a man who is the head of he's in charge of press for a Catholic organization in Portugal called, which is very well known internationally. You may have heard of it, called Opus Dei. So this is an influential Catholic group. They have, I always say he has the worst job in the world, because Opus Dei has a terrible reputation as being some sort of sinister, dark organization. And I can say this freely because I have no connection to Opus Dei whatsoever. And that's far from the truth. And so his job is always to try and speak to media who are covering Opus Dei and try and show them what things are really like, and inevitably the articles will almost always then sort of have a dark, sinister aspect to them. So he has a very difficult job, but he is constantly called on by bishops, for example, when they have difficult situations in their dioceses, to help them and prepare them for interviews, and he does a great job with that. I think one of the problems is, and I think that may be changing, but a lot of leading religious leaders, they don't think it's necessary, because they have a lot of education, they have a lot of intellectual baggage, and they think that that's enough, but it's not. It's not. Speaking to the press, getting your message across through a journalist to a mass audience can be a very difficult thing to do. What I have done and was very interesting was I helped do media training for a group of young people who were being prepared through an organization called Catholic Voices, and the idea was to prepare young people, young Catholics, to be available so that if a journalist wanted to write a story and he wanted a young Catholic to comment, he could call this organization. They would say, yeah, sure, we've got a list of people and some of them are specialized in this topic or that topic, and they had media training before. And I remember doing that media training was a lot of fun because I got to play the role of the mean journalist who was trying to catch them out and get them to say silly things. And one of the things I always explained to them was you don't, the journalist will ask the question, but you're not forced to answer a badly formulated question, because people sometimes feel locked. So it's like this old story. This is to get away from journalism, but this an English story about there are questions that don't have a right answer. So if you ask someone, so tell me, yes or no, have you stopped beating your wife? There's no right answer. If you say no, it means you're still beating your wife. If you say yes, it means you used to beat your wife. So there's no right answer. So sometimes you can't. If a journalist says yes or no, did you do this or do you think that? You don't have to be locked into the question. Move it around. Say, I'm sorry, I can't answer the question that way. Let me answer it another way. So if I don't need to give more examples. I think you got the point. But doing the media training for those young kids was a lot of fun, and it's something that I think is very necessary, and that more people should look for, and more religious organizations should look for. Definitely.
Thank you so much, Filipe. Honestly, I don't want you to go right now because there are some interesting examples that you are using, and those are the practical ones, right? I categorically or deliberately use this word media training because I happen to have worked with organizations that were designed enough to or media development issues. So we used to perhaps design, organize, or workshops and trainings like these where people have to use those the responses that it just indicated that are you still beating your wife. So it's about the perception or how do you perceive it. So I forgot to ask question that we initially set the tone before our informal meetings. Uh, how did you interact with ACN International? Is this because of your background, or uh, also walk us through about the work that ACN do? Because this is the first time someone from Pakistan perhaps is speaking to a person who's working as a freelancer with ACN International, right? Since Red Wednesday is also coming up, so I want you to touch upon that.
Yeah. Okay. So first of all, just to be very, very clear, I mean, I have a very important and very good relationship with ACN International, and so just to make it very clear, I am a freelancer. So none of what I'm saying now is as an employee or as anyone mandated to speak in the name of ACN. But my relationship with ACN dates way back, because when I was working as a journalist in this media group, I would do a lot of work with ACN Portugal. So ACN Portugal would bring leading Catholic figures from around the world to highlight the difficulties in their countries, and they would call me, and I'd say, yes, I'd love to interview this person, and I'd speak to them. I interviewed several, I think maybe 2 or 3 or 4 Pakistani bishops who traveled to Portugal with ACN Portugal, and so I already had a very good relationship with ACN Portugal. When I was looking for a change in my career, I was looking for options because I didn't want to leave what I was doing empty-handed, and I came across a job posting at ACN International, and I thought, wow, it was someone for the communications team, and I thought this is exactly what I would love to do, but they're based in Germany, so I thought, okay, this was mid-pandemic, so I was like, oh, everyone's working from home nowadays, so surely this might be a possibility. So I got in touch, and they replied saying, thank you for contacting us, but we're really looking for someone full-time in Germany. And I wrote back saying, seriously, maybe we could discuss the option of remote working. It works so well nowadays. I'd love to explore this further with you. And they wrote back saying, yeah, well, we really are looking for someone full time in Germany, but here are some tasks, so that you could do and I thought, if they're sending me tasks to see what my work is like, it's because they're at least open to the option. And fortunately, they were. In the end, they didn't hire me as full time staff, but as a freelancer. But it has allowed me to really develop this relationship with ACN International, which has been so rewarding for me, because it's an area of work that I really love. highlighting the difficulties. I don't love it because there are difficulties, but I love being able to shine a light on, in this case specifically, Catholic and Christian communities in different parts of the world that are going through a difficult time. And now, to clarify, ACN does not only work with persecuted Christians; it works with Christians in need, as the name suggests. So I usually give this example. We're now speaking as someone who cooperates with ACN. ACN funded the rebuilding of houses in Iraq, houses for Christian communities that were destroyed by ISIS. Okay, so that the communities can go back, so that they have somewhere to live, so that they can remain in the country, because it's something we want to avoid, these countries being left without their Christian communities, because we feel that it's important that they remain there. And so that's one thing that ACN does. For example, rebuilding houses of Christians who were directly persecuted for their faith. On the other hand, at the same time, the organization is providing motorboats for missionaries in the Amazon to be able to travel upriver to go and serve communities that would normally take them 3 days to reach. Nowadays, they can reach them with a motorboat in 8 hours. So it's a completely different mission, but it's a Christian community that has a specific need. And so ACN is there to try and address that. So they do a lot of very, very good work in over 100 countries all over the world. Many Christian communities in either very poor countries or countries where they suffer persecution depend on ACN for meeting a lot of their daily needs. Speaking of your part of the world, ACN has many projects in Pakistan, a very good working relationship with the Catholic Church in Pakistan. A lot of these projects, it should also be said, and this is something that ACN attaches a lot of importance to, end up also benefiting the wider community. So if we support the salaries of teachers in schools, those schools do not only serve Catholic students, as we know in Pakistan, for example, in many other parts of the world, including in majority Muslim countries. Catholic schools or Christian schools do serve a lot of the local Muslim or other religion populations as well, and are very well esteemed for that. And so there's that benefit, but also other things like, for example, our response to the earthquake in Syria. The devastating earthquake in Syria, in terms of food and emergency aid, also went to non-Christian families as well. So there is that is very important. But ACN is a pontifical foundation. So it is a specifically Catholic foundation, and it has a Catholic mission. That is not something to be underplayed. You asked about Red Wednesday. Red Wednesday began several years ago as an initiative in Brazil. The idea was they lit up special buildings or monuments. In this case, for example, that big Christ the Redeemer statue in Rio de Janeiro, which is obviously one of the landmarks, in red, as a symbol of the blood of those who are being persecuted. So the idea was to highlight the persecution of Christians all over the world and to call people's attention to it, because many people living in the West have, first, no idea that there are Christians living in majority Muslim lands, for example. Not that that's the only place where there's persecution, but as an example. And B, that they are being persecuted, or that Christians are the most persecuted religious community in the world at the moment. And so the idea is to highlight that and call attention to that. And then Red Wednesday spread from Brazil then to many other countries, mostly where there are ACN national offices. That's 23 different countries. Not all of them participate, but most of them do. Some of them have gone further and turned Red Wednesday into Red Week, or even Red November. So they have initiatives all throughout the month. Usually they'll invite someone from one of these countries to go and speak to the people, because that's the closest way of building bridges and really calling attention, to have a first-hand witness. So it's become one of ACN's big initiatives to promote, to call attention to the persecution of Christians. At the same time, another big project that ACN has is the Religious Freedom Report. So whereas Red Wednesday is specifically focused on persecution of Christians, the Religious Freedom Report will highlight violations of religious freedom everywhere. So I spoke and I said that Christians are the most persecuted religious group in the world. That doesn't mean that there aren't members of other religions that are persecuted as well. And we know, speaking of Islam, for example, that there are very terrible persecutions of Muslims in countries like China, in Myanmar, Burma, and so on. And so all of those will be included in the Religious Freedom Report, which has become a landmark report on religious freedom. So I'd say one of the 2 or 3 most important ones that is published, in this case, I think once every 2 years. So that's part of the work that ACN does in this area of religious freedom and the fight against religious persecution.
Thank you so much for providing the insights regarding your work as freelancer with ACN. I'm carefully using this term, and the significant work that they are carrying out across the world. Yeah, when I was looking at the website, when I was going over the content that they are producing, is really commendable. and the amount of work that you just indicated is I need to explore more about it, and perhaps this opens up the opportunity or the possibility of having a collaboration, perhaps with they do have right the bishops. We've indicated with the bishops of Pakistan, especially in Punjab area. So yeah, just the last question. I apologize for taking a lot of time and asking some of the questions that were linked to your work. Uh, where do you see the future of religious reporting is heading to? Are there any emerging trends, challenges, or opportunities you think journalists needs to be prepared or trained for?
Yeah, I often tell the story when I'm speaking about religious journalism. In the, as you know, there's a very famous magazine that is famous all over the world. It's very has an excellent reputation called The Economist. The Economist doesn't just cover economy; it covers all sorts of things, a lot of international news. Fantastic publication. And one of the things that The Economist does really well is obituaries. So when someone famous has died, they'll write an obituary about that person, and they're very well written. They're a lot of fun to read. In their special Millennium Edition, just before the year 2000, so I think the 23rd of December, they published an obituary on God. So the conclusion of the obituary was God is no longer, of course, they're still religious people, but God, therefore religion, is no longer an important factor for the world. It can be ignored. God is dead. In 2007, the same magazine, The Economist, published a special report on the rise of religion in the world. And this is one of the clever things that they do. Instead of hiding their mistake, they said, 7 years ago, we published an obituary of God. We were wrong. We were wrong, and this is why. And they had a really interesting report on the rise of religion and religious belief around the world. Because the world is still very much centered on the West, and I think in the world of media, for example, very much centered on the West, there is this very wrong idea that if religion is no longer very important in the West, then it's no longer very important for the world. I think what happened over the past decade, and especially with the rise of Islamic extremism in the Middle East and all of the consequences that had, and I think ISIS is like the main symbol of that, but of course not the only one. It made a lot of people wake up to the fact that, wait a second, after all, religion is still playing an important role in the world, for good or for bad. In that case, it was for bad, but in many cases for good as well. And so that a lot of people woke up because of that, but a lot of people are still asleep. And speaking of the media, a lot of people are still asleep. And we continue to see people covering religion who have no preparation to do so, who make very silly mistakes. The other day, my mother sent me a link to an article. She said, I got this from a friend. She read it. She was very upset because it says that the Pope is on the side of Russia in the Ukraine war. Can you read it and see what you think? I read it and I wrote back to my mother. It was an opinion piece. And I said, Mom, there are so many mistakes, basic mistakes, deep mistakes, structural mistakes in this article that I couldn't even begin to list them all. Just ignore, this is garbage. Just ignore it. Tell your friend, ignore everything this article says. This guy has no idea what he's writing about, but he wrote it anyway. It got published. He probably got paid for it. Why is this happening? So we desperately need public and media groups to wake up to the fact that they need to have someone specialized in a subject to cover that subject. That doesn't mean the person has to be religious themselves, because then there's this other idea. Oh, so-and-so is religious, and so he will be biased when he's covering religion because he'll always be defending his religion. That's not, I mean, we're sane, rational people like anyone else. We are able to see the faults in even in our own leaders and in the things that we cover, and we're able to rationally cover an issue without being caught up in our own preferences. I mean, I often say, don't get me covering football because I will always favor. I couldn't possibly imagine covering football without favoring my team, and that's why I stay away from it. But I can cover religion rationally, and I've done so, and I think most people can as well. And if necessary, I think I could cover football as well rationally. But I say it as a joke. But definitely we need better preparation on the part of the media to cover what is a very important phenomenon, a very sensitive phenomenon, something that touches the innermost sanctum of people's lives and that people take very seriously. And everyone stands to benefit if we do it properly. We can help fight ignorance. There's a lot of ignorance about what religion says, even amongst many religious believers. And we can see that. I mean, as a non-Muslim, I'm not in a position to say this is true Islam and this is not true Islam. But when I've been spoken to people about this, and sometimes people ask me about this, and I always say, look, I can't say what is true Islam or what isn't, but I can choose to interview and give a voice people who do know and who are interested in furthering the cause of peace and into religious harmony. That's something that I can do rather than just repeat and cover story after story after story of only the bad things that are happening. So that's something that we can all do, that we can all help to improve in our world and in our society, and which is crucial because we live in a world where more and more religions are meeting. I won't say clashing, they're meeting. And sometimes those meetings will be clashes, but they don't have to be. And sometimes they can turn into very fruitful collaboration. And that doesn't. Then you have another extreme. People say, "Oh well, if you show religions collaborating, then really what you're saying is you're relativizing, saying that there is no true religion." No, that's not what we're saying at all. We're saying that maybe as journalists, our job isn't to say what's true religion or what isn't. It's to tell the stories. Now let people decide for themselves. But we can choose what stories to tell. And that's one of the great benefits of being a journalist. We get to choose what stories to tell. So choose them wisely. And that's something that I hope to be able to do more in the future. I recently we published a beautiful story about a Nigerian bishop, and Nigeria, as you know, is going through a very difficult phase of violence, which is not only religious, but religion does play a factor there in the clash between mostly Muslim North and Christian South. But there are tribal issues as well. There's a lot of criminal gangster issues as well. But we had a very interesting interview with a bishop who was the only Christian from his family. His father converted from Islam to Christianity, to Catholicism, and then his son, this bishop, became a bishop. So the vast majority of his extended family were still Muslim. He lived in a Muslim majority area, and he said, as a person, I am a bridge between Islam and Christianity. When I became a bishop, I invited my family to come, and I thought maybe they won't come because I'm becoming a bishop and they're Muslim. And they all came, and it was a huge celebration. And so he is a living witness to how it is possible to be a bridge between two different faith communities, and how wonderful it is for me to be able to tell that story is fantastic.
Yeah, talk about stories. You did tell a lot of stories during your discourse on the topic of reporting on religion. You have covered your own inclination and how did you get involved into the religious reporting or reporting on religion. You talked about the polarization of religion and how it can be deep-seated issue in terms of people's personal life. You did mention about balancing of reporting. There should be, carefully using the words while reporting on religious issues. We did cover a lot on the aspects of social media, content moderation, and stuffs like hate speech and fake news as well. Your approach about covering those stories was magnificent, and this is where we can take it from as a lesson, and how we can sensitize our reporters as well. I did have a question at the end, but I'm skipping that part because I've already ran a lot of your time. It was about the mysticism and the role of religion in your reporting as well. That would sort of deviate us from the original discussion that we had. So thank you so much, Philip, for your time, for your availability. I would want you to speak last 10, 20 seconds as a message of hope, and especially the work that we are doing right now.
Yeah, well, thanks, Furqan, first of all, for inviting me. It's a great privilege to be able to speak. I think I've covered a lot. I mean, I'm not exactly very old. I'm 44, but I've been working religion during a very crucial time for the past decade and a half, maybe. I've seen a lot of horrible things, a lot of terrible things done in the name of religion, a lot of terrible persecution. There are good stories out there, and that's something that brings a lot of hope. And I think that's something that we need to focus on. I mean, I remember we spoke a lot about ISIS and what happened in Iraq, and there was I remember reading at the time, as Christians, and not only Christians, were being persecuted a lot, also a lot of moderate Muslims. There was one man, a university professor, who stood up in the main square in Mosul after it had been taken by ISIS and started speaking publicly against the persecutions that were being carried out. And he was killed. But he was a hero. He was a Muslim. He wasn't a Christian. He could have just played along. He could have just followed the rules and he'd be okay. He wasn't the one that they were after, but he sacrificed himself to speak out for his neighbors. There are many stories like that. And those are the stories that we can look for and really, and obviously as journalists, we have to tell all the stories. Okay, fine. Yes, we can't hide the bad things, but we can shine especially strong light on the good examples. And that's something that really moves me and that I would like to continue doing. So Thank you for the work that you guys do also to highlight the difficulties and the struggles of minorities in your part of the world, who are of course of many different faiths and ethnic groups, and keep it up and keep me updated on your work so that we can cooperate more in the future. That would be great.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, and see you guys for our next episode.